Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty direct, really quite an unsettling pattern of behavior. One analysis we've reviewed frames it as a kind of psychological warfare.
That's right.
And we're going to focus on a specific tactic called DARVO.
DARVO. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Exactly. So the goal here is to really dissect it, what it is, how our sources say it's used, and well, what the consequences might be.
Yeah, and it's important to see how the analysis presents this. It's not just, someone being difficult or having a bad personality trait.
Right.
It's laid out as a deliberate strategy, a kind of playbook.
A playbook, okay.
Think 3 steps. Step 1, deny you did anything wrong.
Yep.
Step 2, attack the person or group accusing you.
Right. Go on the offensive.
Exactly. And step 3, flip the whole thing, make yourself out to be the actual victim in the situation.
Reverse victim and offender. Got it.
Our mission today is really to see that pattern in action based on the analysis provided.
Okay, let's get into it then. How does this DARVO tactic actually, manifest according to this analysis?
Yeah.
The 2016 election seems like a key starting point in the source material.
Yeah, the dynamic with Hillary Clinton. The Access Hollywood tape is presented as a textbook case.
Okay, how so? Walk us through the steps.
Well, the first reaction, the denial phase, wasn't denying the tape existed exactly.
Okay.
It was denying its significance, dismissing it as locker room talk. That's the denial, minimizing it, saying it's not a real issue.
Ah, okay. So downplaying is the denial here. What about the attack part?
Well, the analysis points out it wasn't a direct defense of the tape's content. Instead, the focus shifted.
Shifted how?
To attacking Bill Clinton's past accusers, bringing them up, using those unrelated issues to attack Hillary Clinton by association.
I see. So deflect and attack the opponent on something else entirely. Classic misdirection.
Pretty much. It changes the subject and puts the accuser or their associate on the defensive.
Okay, so deny, attack, then the reversal. How did that work?
This is where he positioned himself as the one being wronged. The analysis highlights the narrative of being the victim.
Victim of what?
Of a rigged media, a political hit job, as a conspiracy trying to stop him. So he was the real target, the real victim in all this.
Wow. Okay, so you see the whole cycle right there.
Yeah.
Deny the severity, attack the opponent via deflection, reverse the roles to become the victim.
Precisely. And the source argues this isn't just an isolated incident, it's a recurring pattern.
Okay, like where else?
We'll take the Mueller investigation into Russian interference.
Right, 2017 to 2019.
The denial there was loud and constant, wasn't it?
Witch hunt, hoax, over and over.
That's the denial phase, just hammering that message. Then the attacks.
On Mueller himself, the FBI, DOJ officials, anyone involved, really.
The analysis mentions them being called traitors, part of a conspiracy. That's the attack phase, undermining the investigators' credibility, their motives.
And the reversal.
Again, positioning himself as the victim. This time of a deep state plot trying to overturn the election results or illegitimately remove him from office.
So it's the same structure again. Deny, attack, reverse.
Exactly the same framework, just applied to a different situation.
The analysis suggests this became almost predictable.
Yeah.
What about the impeachments?
Same thing. According to the source, Ukraine, the first impeachment, the denial was...
The perfect call.
The perfect call, exactly. Flat denial of any wrongdoing. Then the attacks flew.
Against Democrats, calling them partisan lunatics, things like that.
And the reversal, claiming it wasn't a legitimate impeachment process, but a coup, an attempt to overthrow him. Victim again.
And the second impeachment related to January 6th.
Similar pattern noted in the analysis. Initial downplaying or denial of responsibility for inciting anything.
Followed by
fierce attacks on anyone pointing fingers, Republicans, Democrats, media. And the reversal is really tied into the broader election narrative.
Claiming victimhood because of the supposedly stolen election, right?
Yeah.
Casting himself and his supporters as the ones wronged by fraud.
Exactly. The narrative becomes, the real crime was the election, and I'm being persecuted for fighting against it.
It's remarkable how consistently the analysis applies this framework, even tragically, to the COVID-19 pandemic response.
Yes, the source material connects it there too. First, denial of mishandling the response or downplaying the virus itself early on.
Then blame shifting, which sounds like a form of attack.
Right, blaming China, the WHO, shifting responsibility elsewhere, and attacking domestic figures too.
Like Dr. Fauci, other scientists.
Calling them fearmongers, undermining their advice. That's the attack.
And the reversal in the COVID context.
The analysis points to claims of being a victim of negative media coverage, of lies, and framing the response despite everything as heroic. claiming he saved millions.
So even amidst a global health crisis, the source identifies that same deny, attack, reverse pattern.
It underscores the consistency. The analysis really hammers this point. It's presented not as occasional reactions, but as a core strategic approach.
Now, the source material doesn't suggest this happens in a vacuum. It connects DARVO very strongly with disinformation. How do those two work together?
Think of them as mutually reinforcing. Disinformation, spreading false or misleading narratives, it creates the fertile ground for DARVO to work.
How so?
Well, if you muddy the waters enough with lies or distortions, it becomes much easier to deny the actual facts, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so. People don't know what to believe.
Exactly. And it makes the attack phase easier, too. You can attack critics by accusing them of spreading misinformation or being part of the conspiracy that disinformation alleges.
And the reversal.
Disinformation helps sell the victim narrative. If you've been feeding people stories about vast conspiracies against you, it's easier to portray yourself as the target when you get called out.
Can we look at a concrete example? The analysis must highlight some specific disinformation campaigns linked to this.
Oh, definitely. The most prominent one cited is the big lie about the 2020 election.
All the claims of fraud.
Yes, baseless claims about rigged voting machines, dead voters, ballot stuffing. Amplified by figures like Giuliani, Powell, and others, according to the source.
And how did that fuel the DARVO cycle?
Well, it was the denial denying the legitimate election results. The attacks were on the election system itself, election workers, anyone upholding the results, and the reversal was claiming Trump was the victim of massive fraud that stole the election from him. The disinformation created the narrative that allowed that reversal to seem plausible to his supporters.
And the analysis explicitly links this to the violence of January 6th.
It does. It presents it as a direct consequence of that sustained disinformation campaign coupled with the DARVO tactic. Gaslighting millions, essentially.
What about the way the media was handled? The enemy of the people rhetoric.
That's another key example in the analysis. Constantly attacking news outlets, calling negative stories fake news, targeting individual journalists.
How does that serve DARVO and disinformation?
It serves the denial by preemptively discrediting any potential criticism. If the source of the criticism is labeled fake or an enemy, their reports can be dismissed out of hand.
Makes sense.
And it fuels the victim narrative, look how unfairly the media treats me. It's presented as a way to control the narrative and insulate oneself from accountability. Undermining a free press is a core part of it.
The source even brings up climate change denial in this context. That feels a bit different. How does the analysis connect that?
It frames the dismissal of climate science as a hoax, as another form of disinformation, serving a similar purpose.
Okay.
You deny the scientific consensus, that's the denial. You attack the messengers, climate scientists, activists, portraying them as alarmists or pushing a hidden agenda.
And the reversal.
You can frame regulations or actions to combat climate change as attacks on the economy or freedom, positioning those resisting action as victims of a radical green agenda, denying responsibility by attacking the science and the proposed solutions.
It's quite a comprehensive picture of how these tactics allegedly weave together. And the analysis then takes us even further, drawing comparisons between this behavior and, well, dictators and fascists.
Yes, it's a strong claim, and the analysis lays out specific parallels it sees.
What are those parallels?
One major area highlighted is the cultivation of a cult of personality.
Meaning?
Demanding intense personal loyalty above all else. Loyalty to the leader, not necessarily to principles, institutions, or even the country. Rallies are described as having an almost worshipful atmosphere.
The source gives examples.
Yeah, things like the firing of James Comey, the public expressions of anger at Jeff Sessions for recusing himself from the Russia probe, actions seemingly driven by perceived disloyalty, and statements like, "Only I can fix it."
That intense focus on personal loyalty is definitely something associated with authoritarian figures. What else?
Another key point in the analysis is the effort to crush dissent.
How is that defined?
It includes the constant stream of attacks on critics, insults, nicknames, but also things like lawsuits, encouraging boycotts, even, allegedly, inciting harassment against opponents or perceived enemies.
And the calls to lock up political rivals.
That's cited as a particularly stark example, treating political opposition not just as wrong, but as criminal, something you see in non-democratic states.
Okay, so cult of personality, crushing dissent. What about ideology? Nationalism.
The America First slogan and the associated policies are presented as fitting a pattern of ultranationalism.
Coupled with scapegoating.
Yes. The analysis points to the rhetoric around immigrants, for instance, the comments about Mexican immigrants being rapists, the focus on building the wall as examples of scapegoating an external or minority group, which is often a feature of fascist ideologies.
And then there's the really fundamental stuff about democracy itself.
Absolutely. The source puts enormous weight on the actions surrounding the 2020 election.
The refusal to concede.
The refusal to concede. The persistent, baseless claims of widespread fraud. The pressure campaign on state officials to find votes, and ultimately the rhetoric leading up to and during the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
These are presented as direct attacks on democratic processes.
Yes, fundamentally. Attacks on the peaceful transfer of power, on the legitimacy of elections behaviors described as hallmarks of authoritarianism.
Now, the analysis is careful to say it's not a perfect one-to-one fit with historical dictators or fascists, right?
Right.
What are the distinctions it makes?
It does acknowledge that. For one, the U.S. system of checks and balances, while stressed, remained largely intact, limiting absolute power.
Okay.
It also notes that while there's strong nationalism and populism, a fully concurrent, rigid ideology like traditional fascism might be less evident than, say, a primary drive for personal power and loyalty.
And things like state control.
Right. There wasn't a complete state takeover of industry or a formal state paramilitary force in the way you saw in mid-20th century regimes, although concerns about groups like the Proud Boys are noted.
But despite those caveats, the source material still comes to a pretty strong conclusion. It even gives a rating.
It does, which is unusual. It rates the alignment with dictatorial tendencies as extremely high, a 9 out of 10.
Why so high, given the distinctions?
The reasoning provided emphasizes the combination of factors. The sustained assault on democratic norms and institutions, particularly election integrity, the intense demand for personal loyalty over illegal or ethical considerations, the systematic use of disinformation, the January 6th events, and even praise for actual authoritarian leaders abroad.
And the final characterization is blunt.
Very. The analysis concludes it's fair, based on the evidence presented, to say Trump has the heart of a fascist and the soul of a dictator, motivated primarily by acquiring and maintaining power, whatever the cost to democratic principles might be.
That is a heavy assessment. So bringing this all together, the analysis talks about a threat vector. What's the perceived danger here? What are the core concerns?
The concerns are multifaceted, both domestic and global, according to the source. Domestically, a major worry is the erosion of trust.
Trust in what?
In fundamental institutions. Elections, the justice system, the media, science. When those are constantly attacked and undermined, it destabilizes society.
And leads to polarization.
Exactly. Increased polarization, the radicalization of parts of the population. The analysis points to January 6th as a potential preview of what happens when that trust collapses and radicalization takes hold. A real risk of civil unrest.
And beyond the U.S. borders, what are the global implications discussed?
Significant damage to U.S. alliances and international standing is a key point. Withdrawing from agreements like the Paris Accord or the Iran deal, criticizing NATO, these actions are seen as weakening partnerships.
Which creates openings for others.
Yes, the analysis suggests it emboldens adversaries, countries like Russia or China, who may see a less cohesive West. It also undermines collective action on global problems.
Like climate change.
Like climate change, yeah, or pandemic response, or nuclear proliferation. Basically destabilizing the international order that the U.S. has largely underpinned since World War II.
And the source suggests this threat isn't static, but actually increasing. Why?
Because the tactics, the DARVO, the disinformation, the challenges to democratic norms haven't gone away. The analysis argues that their continued presence and influence in the political discourse means the erosion continues. It uses the phrase metastasizing cancer to describe the perceived spread and worsening of the threat.
That's a powerful image. And the potential scale of the consequences.
The language used is stark, cataclysmic in potential magnitude, universal in scope.
Universal.
Meaning it affects everyone, not just the U.S. The argument is that the U.S. plays such a central role in global stability and the economy that its significant destabilization would have profound negative consequences worldwide.
Okay, so let's try to summarize the main takeaways from this deep dive into the analysis we've been discussing.
Well, I think the core points are, first, the identification of a consistent strategic use of the DARVO tactic, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender.
Right.
Second, how this tactic is deeply intertwined with and amplified by deliberate disinformation campaigns. Third, the argument that these behavioral patterns show a strong alignment with recognized authoritarian and dictatorial tendencies, even if not a perfect fit.
And finally,
that this combination represents a serious, ongoing, and potentially escalating threat to both American democratic institutions and global stability. The analysis paints a picture of significant danger.
It certainly does. And that really leaves us and everyone listening with a challenging thought, doesn't it? Based on this analysis, what are the long-term implications if these patterns, the DARVO, the disinformation, the challenges to democratic norms, continue or intensify? What does that mean for the future, not just here, but globally?
It's definitely something that requires serious consideration.
Indeed. A sobering note to end on. Thanks for exploring this analysis with us today.